The night stretched on, quiet and still, yet a lone window in a modest apartment remained lit. Inside, Eleanor Hayes sat hunched over an aging desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The dim glow of the screen illuminated her weary face, reflecting a string of unanswered emails, messages she had sent to banks, charities, and every contact she could think of. The responses were painfully repetitive. "We regret to inform you that we are unable to assist at this time." She exhaled shakily and lowered her hands onto her lap. Exhaustion pressed down on her, but there was no room for rest. Across town, in a stark white hospital room, her mother, Beatrice Hayes, lay motionless, her breathing shallow. The doctor's words replayed in Eleanor's mind like a relentless drumbeat. If she doesn't receive surgery within 2 weeks, her chances will be minimal. It wasn't a matter of willpower, it was a matter of money. And the amount needed was far beyond what Eleanor could possibly earn, no matter how many hours she worked. She had always been a fighter, never one to surrender to misfortune. Since losing her father as a child, she had carried the weight of responsibility, taking on multiple jobs to support her mother. They had struggled, yes, but they had never let hardship rob them of hope. "Life is unpredictable," her mother had often said, "but as long as you hold on to kindness, the world will never truly turn its back on you." Eleanor had lived by those words, refusing to compromise her morals no matter how desperate things became. But time was slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. She had done everything she could, doubling her shifts at the cafe, sacrificing sleep, smiling through exhaustion as dark circles deepened under her eyes. She had turned to charities only to be met with sympathetic rejections. She had listed everything she owned for sale, from her old car to sentimental keepsakes. Yet despite her relentless efforts, the sum she had managed to scrape together barely made a dent in what was needed. Every day her mother grew weaker. Every night, the fear of losing her tightened its grip. As Eleanor stepped out of the hospital that evening, the crisp night air wrapped around her, sending a chill through her bones. Above her, the stars flickered against the vast darkness. "There has to be another way," she whispered, her breath curling into the cold. "There has to be something I haven't tried." She had no way of knowing that fate was already shifting, setting events into motion that would change everything. That night, an offer would come, one that would change everything. The Celeste Grand Hotel shimmered under a cascade of golden lights, hosting an opulent charity gala reserved for the city's most elite. The air was thick with the scent of fine champagne and expensive perfume, the soft murmur of conversation punctuated by the crisp clink of crystal glasses. Gowns spun like liquid silk, tuxedos were pressed to perfection, an atmosphere so grand, so untouchable, it felt suffocating. Eleanor Hayes stood in the shadows, a tray of champagne flutes balanced carefully in her hands. She was an outsider here, just another nameless server weaving through the glittering crowd. But she had no choice. This job, though exhausting, paid well, money she desperately needed for her mother. She moved through the room with practiced ease, offering drinks and disappearing into the background. But then, everything else faded into insignificance the moment he arrived, Lucian Wolfe. His name was legend in the world of finance, a billionaire known for his ruthless precision, a man who could acquire an entire empire with a flick of his wrist or ruin someone's career with nothing more than a well-placed whisper. He strode into the room with effortless command, his sharp gaze sweeping across the sea of high society without the slightest trace of interest. The perfectly tailored black suit accentuated his powerful frame, his dark hair styled with just enough carelessness to appear effortless. But it was his eyes, cold, calculating, a shade of blue so piercing it felt as though they could strip a person down to their very core, that silenced the room. People noticed him. Lucian didn't notice them. Except for one person. Across the grand hall, his gaze locked onto Eleanor. A brief flicker of curiosity crossed his face. There, then gone. She had no idea she was being watched, too preoccupied with navigating the endless stream of guests. But then, a strange, unshakable sensation crawled up her spine. The feeling of being studied, observed. She turned her head and met his gaze. For a heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. Those ice-blue eyes bore into her, unwavering, unreadable. Not just looking at her, but through her, as if he had already unraveled the secrets she fought so hard to conceal. Wordlessly, he reached for a glass from her tray, his gaze never leaving her face. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, smooth, carrying an authority that left no room for indifference. Eleanor straightened, instincts kicking in. Just a server. That's all she was tonight. She forced her expression into something neutral, something guarded. "I'm just working." She made a move to step away, but Lucian wasn't finished. Slowly, he brought the glass to his lips, taking an unhurried sip before tilting his head slightly, studying her as if she were an equation waiting to be solved. "No." His voice was softer this time, yet strangely certain. "You're not like the others here." Her brows pulled together slightly, unsure of what he meant. Lucian held her gaze for a long moment, before a hint of a smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. A smile that held no warmth, only quiet amusement. "Your eyes," he murmured, "they belong to someone who has lost everything. But they're still fighting, refusing to fall." The words struck deeper than they should have. Eleanor stiffened. Did he see her? The exhaustion she tried so hard to hide, the quiet desperation that kept her moving forward, step after step, no matter how impossible things felt. Before she could gather herself, she turned away, eager to end this strange exchange. But just as she stepped forward, his voice brushed against her ear, low, measured, and laced with something dangerous. "You need money, don't you?" Her grip tightened around the tray, her pulse faltering for the briefest moment. Slowly, she turned back, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" Lucian leaned against the bar, the glint of amusement still lingering in his icy stare. He took another slow sip of his drink, as if weighing his next words carefully. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice casual yet heavy with intent. $1 million. Eleanor's world tilted. "What did you just say?" Eleanor's voice came out sharp, disbelieving. $1 million. Lucian Wolfe repeated himself without hesitation, his tone calm, unwavering. "For one night." Every muscle in Eleanor's body went rigid. The weight of his words crashed into her, a violent slap to her dignity. For a moment she could hardly process it, but when she did, something inside her ignited. Hot, unrestrained fury. "What?" she hissed, barely restraining the anger bubbling up in her chest. "What kind of person do you think I am?" Lucian only smirked, that infuriating, knowing smirk, as if he had already predicted her reaction. "I don't think you're any kind of person," he said smoothly, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Just a desperate girl who needs money, and I'm a man who can give it to you." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You think I would agree to this?" Her voice dripped with contempt. Lucian shrugged, completely unfazed. "I don't know." He leaned in slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "But I do know one thing. When you truly have no other choice, you'll come looking for me." His words sliced through her pride like a blade. Eleanor wanted to slap him, to throw the tray in his face, to scream that she wasn't for sale, but she did none of those things. Instead, she clenched her fists so tightly, her nails dug into her palms, her entire body trembling with rage. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Behind her, she heard his quiet, amused chuckle. "I'll be waiting." Her blood boiled. She would never, never accept his offer. But the moment she stepped out of the grand ballroom, stepping into the biting cold of reality, the thought crept in, unwanted, undeniable. Do I really have any other choice? After that night at the gala, Eleanor buried herself in work, throwing herself into an endless cycle of exhaustion. She picked up every extra shift she could at the restaurant, scrubbed floors in the early mornings, and reached out to every charity she could find. But no matter how hard she worked, how much she pushed herself beyond her limits, the money barely trickled in. It wasn't enough. She knocked on doors, made desperate calls, borrowed from anyone willing to lend, but the amount she needed was far too great. Again and again, she was met with polite refusals, pitying glances, the same quiet shake of the head. Every rejection chipped away at her hope, at her resolve. And every time she returned home, back to that tiny apartment where her mother lay in bed, her face pale, her breathing fragile, an unbearable weight crushed her chest. The doctor's warning echoed in her mind like a death sentence. If she doesn't undergo surgery soon, her condition will become critical. The words looped in her head over and over, a merciless reminder of how little time was left. Outside the hospital, rain drizzled against the pavement, cool and steady. Eleanor barely felt it. She stood there, motionless, her eyes locked on the glass doors leading into the treatment ward. Beyond those doors, her mother lay asleep, her breath shallow, her body growing weaker by the day. Beatrice had always put on a strong front, always told Eleanor that everything would be fine. But Eleanor knew better. She saw the pain in her mother's eyes, saw how much strength it took just to smile. She blamed herself. She should have found another way. She should have made more money. But now, she was at the end of the road. No more time. No more options. The hospital wouldn't wait. Her mother's body couldn't wait. And in the back of her mind, overlapping with the weight of the medical bills and the suffocating fear, came Lucian Wolf's voice. Low, composed, certain. $1 million for one night. Eleanor clenched her fists, nails biting into her skin. She had sworn she would never, never consider it. But now, what choice did she have? She couldn't wait any longer. If she lost her mother, she would lose everything. Hot tears slid down Eleanor's cheeks, her vision blurring as the weight of her reality crashed over her. She had fought for so long, sacrificed so much, but it wasn't enough. And now she stood at the edge of a decision she never thought she'd have to make. Pride, or the only family she had left. Her teeth sank into her lower lip so hard she tasted blood. The very thought of what she was about to do made her stomach twist. She wasn't someone who could be bought. She wasn't someone who surrendered. But no matter how much she tried to push against fate, she had been cornered into a place with no escape. She imagined her mother waking up, seeing her daughter begging the doctors for more time. She imagined watching the light in Beatrice's eyes fade, the regret of not being able to do more suffocating her until the end. She couldn't let that happen. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut, took a deep breath, and pulled out her phone. Her hands shook so badly that it took her a few tries to dial the number. Each digit burned against her pride, but she refused to let herself hesitate any longer. She pressed call. The dial tone rang, once, twice. Every second stretched unbearably long, an eternity she wished she could escape from. Then, finally, his voice. I was waiting for this call. Eleanor gritted her teeth, forcing her voice to stay steady. Do you still stand by your offer? A pause, then a quiet, knowing chuckle. Of course, she swallowed, the shame clawing at her throat. Her entire body felt like it was breaking apart as she forced herself to say the words that sealed her fate. I agree. On the other end of the line, Lucian Wolf smirked. Good. I'll send you the address. We meet tonight. The luxury car came to a smooth stop before towering iron gates. Eleanor sat frozen for a moment, staring at the estate before her. A vast, imposing mansion stretched across an expansive piece of land, its towering structure bathed in the soft glow of strategically placed lights. Every inch of the property was flawless. The paved driveway pristine, the hedges trimmed to perfection, the marble pillars gleaming under the night sky. And yet, despite its beauty, the place exuded an eerie coldness, a reflection of the man who had built it. Eleanor inhaled deeply, gripping her hands tightly in her lap before finally pushing the door open. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. As she approached, the mansion's grand doors swung open without a sound. An older man, dressed in a crisp black suit, gave her a slight bow. Miss Hayes, Mr. Wolf is expecting you. She gave a curt nod, stepping inside. Her footsteps echoed against the polished marble floors, the sound unnervingly loud in the vast emptiness of the space. No voices, no warmth, no sign of life, only the hollow silence that swallowed everything whole. The only sound in the vast mansion was the soft echo of Eleanor's footsteps following the butler. No photographs, no family portraits, no hint of life within these walls. Everything about this place was pristine, designed for grandeur, but utterly devoid of warmth. Her chest tightened with unease as they stopped in front of an enormous wooden door, its dark surface stretching all the way to the ceiling. The butler knocked once, a gentle but firm sound before pushing it open. Mr. Wolf, Miss Hayes has arrived. The man who controlled entire empires, the cold-blooded Lucian Wolf, stood by the window, his back turned to her. He didn't need to face her. His presence alone was suffocating. The air in the room shifted when he finally spoke, his deep, steady voice filling the space between them. Right on time. When he turned, his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. Under the dim glow of the chandelier, his features were sharp, carved with precision, almost inhumanly flawless. Yet there was no warmth in them, no sign of emotion beneath that unreadable gaze. Eleanor swallowed, forcing herself to stand her ground. "Can we get this over with?" she asked, fighting the tremor threatening to slip into her voice. Lucian took a slow step forward, his sharp eyes scanning her like a puzzle he was trying to solve. "In a hurry?" he mused, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "Relax, Eleanor. This isn't a business transaction." Her fingers curled into fists, his words sliced through her pride like a blade. "You said that after tonight, we would act as if we never knew each other," she replied evenly. "I just want this to be over as quickly as possible." Lucian studied her for a long moment before letting out a quiet chuckle, one that held no real amusement. "I'm used to women trying to prolong their time with me," he remarked, his voice edged with something unreadable. "I didn't expect someone who just wants to get it over with." Eleanor didn't respond. She wasn't here to impress him. She wasn't here to gain anything from him. She was here for one reason only, to save her mother. Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he could see straight through her thoughts. Then, without another word, he turned away and walked toward the bar. He poured himself a drink, the slow swirl of amber liquid catching the light before he brought the glass to his lips. "I was clear about the terms," he said, his tone controlled, detached. He lifted the glass in a casual motion, his gaze glinting with something unspoken. "One night. After that, you disappear from my life." There was no pretense, no unnecessary charm. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She had expected him to act without hesitation, to claim what he had paid for like a man who always got what he wanted. But he didn't rush, he didn't close the distance between them. There was no urgency, no hunger in his gaze. He simply stood there, watching her. Then, after a long pause, he set his drink down and spoke, his voice lower, rougher. "Do you know why I chose you?" Eleanor frowned. "Because I need money," she answered without hesitation. Lucian shook his head. He stepped closer, not invading her space, but closing just enough distance for his presence to feel heavier. "No." His voice was slow, deliberate, as if peeling back the layers of a secret only he knew. "I chose you because you're different." Eleanor blinked. "Different?" Lucian tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You're not like the women who throw themselves at me for power or wealth," he murmured, his tone quiet but firm. "You need the money, but you hate yourself for it." His words hit like a knife to the chest. Eleanor turned her face away, unwilling to meet his gaze any longer. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. For a long moment, Lucian said nothing. Then finally, his voice dropped to something almost vulnerable, something barely above a confession. "A family." Eleanor froze. She turned back to him, confusion flickering in her expression. Lucian's lips curved into the faintest smirk, but there was no amusement behind it. "Just for one night," he murmured, his voice softer now, almost distant. "I want to live like a normal man, not a billionaire, not a ruthless businessman." His gaze met hers, steady, unflinching. "I just want to know what it feels like. I want you to cook dinner with me, sit at a table with me, talk to me like we've known each other for years." Eleanor couldn't find the words to respond. This was not what she had expected. She had prepared herself for something far colder, something transactional, something that would strip away what little dignity she had left. But instead, Lucian Wolfe, the man the world saw as untouchable, ruthless, and without weakness, was asking her for something different. And that, more than anything, left her feeling more shaken than she had ever been before. She barely had time to process his words before he turned and strode toward the expansive kitchen. The space, much like the rest of the mansion, was impeccable and lavish, yet utterly devoid of warmth. There were no signs of life, no hint that anyone had ever truly lived here. "We're cooking together," Lucian said, his deep, steady voice making it sound like the most natural thing in the world. Eleanor blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "You want to cook?" Lucian arched an eyebrow, something between amusement and challenge flickering in his cold blue eyes. Do you think I don't know how? She didn't answer. She simply followed him in silence, still trying to make sense of this unexpected turn of events. She had heard countless rumors about Lucian Wolfe, the ruthless billionaire, the man whose name alone commanded fear. But the man standing before her now, he was searching for something else, something softer. Lucian pulled open the refrigerator, retrieving fresh ingredients and setting them on the counter. Then, turning to her, he said simply, "You'll help me. We'll cook together." Eleanor hesitated before giving a slow nod. This wasn't what she had agreed to when she came here. But maybe it was a way to keep some distance between them. They began preparing the meal, working in quiet harmony. Eleanor chopped vegetables while Lucian handled the meat and main dishes. The rhythmic sound of the knife hitting the cutting board blended with the sizzle of oil in the pan, creating an unexpectedly peaceful atmosphere. For the first time since she arrived, the mansion didn't feel so suffocating. Fragments of a painful past. The silence between them was interrupted when Lucian spoke again, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. "Have you ever wondered why I live in a house this big, yet there's no sign of life in it?" Eleanor looked up, meeting his gaze. There was something different in his expression now, something distant, as if he was seeing ghosts only he could remember. "This house is just a shell," he continued, his voice edged with something almost bitter. "Like me, perfect on the outside, empty on the inside." Eleanor's hand stilled mid-motion. Lucian didn't look at her as he spoke, his words slow, deliberate, peeling back the layers of a story he rarely shared. "When I was a child, my mother left with another man. She abandoned me with my father, a man who never wanted a child in the first place." His voice was calm, but there was something in it, something raw beneath the surface. Every time he looked at me, all he saw was the woman who walked away. His gaze flickered, distant. I grew up in that coldness. No love. No warmth. I learned early that in this world, if you're not strong, if you're not ruthless, no one respects you. Eleanor's chest tightened. She had never imagined that behind Lucian's power, his arrogance, his ruthless reputation, was a man shaped by wounds far deeper than she had thought possible. "So you decided to become like him," she murmured, her voice soft, filled with understanding. "Strong. Ruthless." Lucian turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe," he said quietly. Then, after a long pause, he added, "But no matter how much money or power I have." And just for a second, just a fleeting moment, he looked like a man searching for something he had never been able to find. "Even with everything I have, I still can't fill that emptiness." Lucian's words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken sorrow. Eleanor didn't know how to respond. His wounds ran too deep, carved into him over years of isolation. What comfort could she possibly offer to a man who had built his entire existence on survival? Two souls, two wounds. The silence between them stretched, thick with emotions neither of them knew how to express. And then, as if drawn by the moment, Eleanor spoke. "I'm not wealthy." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I'm just an ordinary woman, living in a small apartment, juggling multiple jobs just to get by." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "But I was luckier than you." Lucian didn't interrupt, his sharp gaze locked onto hers, listening. "I had my mother." The emotions in her voice made it impossible to hide the truth. She had nothing but love to give. Even in our worst moments, she would smile and tell me that things would get better. She took a deep breath, but the pain still crept into her eyes. "But now she's sick, and no matter how hard I try, I can't save her." Her voice wavered slightly, and she clenched her fists, swallowing the lump in her throat. "That's why I'm here," she admitted finally, her gaze locking onto his. "Not for money, not for ambition. For her." A long moment passed. No judgment, no defenses, just two broken souls recognizing something familiar in each other. Lucian didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned back to the stove, resuming his task as if the conversation had never happened. But something in the air had shifted. The cold detachment, the armor he always wore, was gone. For the first time since she had stepped into his world, Eleanor felt something unexpected settle inside her. A quiet understanding. When dinner was ready, they sat across from each other at the grand dining table. An absurd contrast. two strangers thrown together by desperation, sharing an intimate moment neither had anticipated. Lucian poured her a glass of wine, his presence no longer as imposing, his edges softened by the flickering glow of the candlelight. "Thank you for listening," he murmured, his voice lower, gentler. Eleanor offered him a small smile, sensing the shift between them. An unspoken connection, something neither of them had expected. The dinner passed in quiet serenity. Neither of them rushed. Neither of them spoke about the deal that had brought her here. As the golden light from the chandelier bathed them in warmth, Lucian poured them both another glass of wine. "Do you like wine?" he asked, his deep voice void of the earlier coldness. Eleanor lifted the glass, watching the crimson liquid swirl before shaking her head slightly. "Not really." She paused before adding, "But sometimes I think a little wine helps people forget, just for a while." Lucian's lips curved into a knowing smirk. "True," he mused. "But do you want to forget tonight?" She hesitated. Did she? Could she? They clinked their glasses together, the soft chime echoing in the quiet room. As she took a slow sip, letting the rich taste linger on her tongue, she realized something. The night was far from over, and Lucian Wolfe was no longer just a name to her. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "Have you ever thought about your dreams?" Lucian blinked, caught off guard. He was used to numbers, power plays, and corporate wars, not dreams. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes contemplative. "I once dreamed of having a family." Eleanor frowned slightly. Lucian let out a quiet, almost bitter laugh. "Sounds contradictory, doesn't it?" he murmured. "A man like me, cold, ruthless, once wished for something as simple as that. For something as simple as a real family." Eleanor didn't respond. She only watched him, silently waiting, giving him space, as if hoping he would let her see more of the man hidden beneath the armor. Lucian placed his glass down, his gaze drifting somewhere distant, somewhere she couldn't reach. "When I was a child, I used to believe my mother would come back, that she had only left for a little while, and one day she would hold me again and tell me it was all just a bad dream." Eleanor clenched her hands under the table. She wasn't sure why, but hearing those words, hearing the quiet pain woven into them, made something in her chest tighten. But that never happened. Lucian let out a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "Instead, I learned not to expect anything, because no one ever stays." A lump formed in Eleanor's throat. She had never imagined that beneath his cold, untouchable exterior lay such a deep and unhealed wound. Lowering her voice, she said gently, "Not everyone will leave you." Lucian's eyes flickered with something almost vulnerable, just for a moment, before he masked it again, retreating behind the walls he had spent a lifetime building. Leaning on his hand, he studied her, then asked, "And what about you? What's your dream?" Eleanor smiled faintly, as if reminiscing about something long out of reach. "Nothing too grand," she admitted. "I just want my mother to get better. I want a peaceful life, doing what I love with a little house and a garden full of flowers." Lucian listened intently. The woman sitting in front of him was unlike anyone he had ever met. She wasn't here for power, for status, or for wealth. She simply wanted peace. A dream that, even for her, seemed impossible. Silence settled between them, calm, unspoken. Two people who should have been complete opposites now saw fragments of themselves in each other. Eleanor felt warmth spreading through her. Not just from the wine, but from the way Lucian was looking at her. His gaze, once so detached, now held something softer, something unexpected. "If you could go back," she asked, her voice quiet, "would you change anything?" Lucian didn't answer right away. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, finally, he murmured, "Maybe I wouldn't let myself become the man I am now." Eleanor's breath caught. For the first time, she wasn't looking at Lucian Wolfe, the ruthless billionaire. She was looking at a man tired of the person he had become. Somewhere along the way, the distance between them had disappeared. Lucian reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Eleanor's ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. A touch, surprisingly gentle. "Eleanor." His voice was low, softer than she had ever heard it. She didn't pull away. She looked into his stormy blue eyes and saw the loneliness he had buried for so long, the longing for something he had never allowed himself to have. They both knew that if they crossed this line, there would be no turning back. but neither of them wanted to stop. Lucian leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, not forcefully, not possessively, but carefully, almost hesitant, as if afraid she might disappear. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his breath mixing with hers. The kiss started slow, cautious, but it deepened quickly, growing more urgent, more desperate. Lucian wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer, as if trying to memorize the way she felt in his arms. And Eleanor kissed him back, not because of a deal, not because of money, but because, in that moment, she needed this warmth just as much as he did. For a fleeting moment, they forgot everything. Forgot their pain, forgot their fears, forgot the world outside this room. Forgot their wounds, forgot logic, forgot what had brought them here in the first place. For one night, they weren't strangers, bound by a transaction. They were just two lonely souls who had found each other in the darkness. And in that fleeting moment, they felt like a real family. The soft glow of dawn filtered through the heavy curtains, casting a pale, golden hue over the vast yet empty room. Lucian slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, he simply lay there, feeling the lingering warmth beside him. Then, as he turned his head, his gaze settled on the woman still lost in sleep. Eleanor. She lay there, her breathing soft and steady, her features peaceful, as if, for just a little while, she had forgotten the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Strands of her dark hair cascaded over her cheek, her lips slightly parted, lost in some distant dream. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. Untouched by artifice, unaffected by the things that usually swayed people around him. Lucian watched her in silence, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Last night had been nothing more than an arrangement. That was what he had told himself. That was what he needed to believe. And yet, as he looked at her curled beneath the sheets, a strange, hollow sensation crept over him. A sense of loss, as though something vital had slipped through his fingers before he even had the chance to hold on to it. There was a gentleness in her that unsettled him, stirring memories he had buried long ago. The warmth of a family, the longing for something real. Things he had spent years teaching himself to dismiss as foolish illusions. His hand lifted slightly, hesitating just above her cheek. For a brief, reckless moment, he was tempted to touch her, to trace the softness of her skin, to memorize the warmth she radiated. But then, he stopped. No, he couldn't allow himself to fall into this illusion. Last night had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, and weakness was something he could never afford. His jaw tightened as he clenched his fists, forcing every lingering emotion back into submission. He had made the rules clear from the start. One night, nothing more. No exceptions. Without another moment of hesitation, Lucian rose from the bed. He moved toward the desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a checkbook. The pen glided across the paper with cold precision. A signature. A number. A clean transaction. He placed the check neatly on the table, a small slip of paper carrying an unforgiving finality. This was the price of last night. This was how it ended. He buttoned his shirt, smoothing out the fabric with practiced ease, but when his gaze flickered back to Eleanor, he lingered. Just a second too long. And in that fleeting moment, something sharp twisted inside his chest. Regret? Pain? He wasn't sure, but he didn't let himself dwell on it. Without another glance back, Lucian turned and walked out of the room. He didn't look back, a heart that ached. The golden morning light streamed through the windows, gently pulling Eleanor from sleep. She blinked slowly, her mind still lost in the haze of dreams. The room was quiet, still, too still. And that's when she realized he was gone. Her chest tightened. She sat up abruptly, her gaze sweeping across the vast emptiness of the room. The warmth beside her had faded, but its ghost still lingered in the sheets. Then her eyes landed on the table. A single piece of paper. Eleanor swung her legs over the bed, stepping onto the cool marble floor. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached for it. The crisp texture of the check was light in her hands, but the weight of its meaning was suffocating. The numbers stared back at her. Stark, undeniable. This was what he had left her. This was what last night had been worth. A bitter smile ghosted over her lips. A bitter smile ghosted over her lips. She had known this would happen. She had reminded herself over and over again that this was nothing more than a deal. A simple transaction, cold, calculated, emotionless. Then why did it hurt so much? Eleanor inhaled sharply, forcing herself to push down the whirlwind of emotions threatening to consume her. She couldn't allow herself to break. She had to remember why she was here. For her mother. This money would save Beatrice's life. It would give her the chance to fight, to live. That was all that mattered. Eleanor tightened her grip on the check, her fingers trembling for just a moment before she straightened her shoulders. She would take this money, pay for her mother's treatment, and disappear. No traces, no goodbyes, because from the very beginning, she and Lucian had never been anything more than a fleeting, cold exchange. No matter how much her heart wanted to believe otherwise. Lucian Wolfe returned to his office as if nothing had happened. The towering headquarters of Wolfe Enterprises operated with its usual efficiency. Employees bowed respectfully as he passed, and his schedule remained packed with back-to-back meetings, leaving no room for even a second of pause. Multi-million-dollar deals were signed with the same precision and ruthlessness that had built his empire. Everything functioned as it always had. No one noticed that something within him had changed. On the surface, he remained the same, calculated, composed, untouchable. The man every competitor feared, the man who thrived in an unforgiving world of power and control. But he knew the truth. Something was different. A hollow ache gnawed at him, a wound he couldn't see but couldn't ignore. And the cause of it was the woman he had paid to walk out of his life. Eleanor. Every night, Lucian found himself standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the city lights that never seemed to dim. He closed his eyes, but instead of contracts and numbers, he saw her. He saw the warmth in her eyes, the quiet strength hidden beneath her pain. He remembered the way she smiled when they cooked together, the way she had listened as he spoke about his past without judgment or pity, the way her touch had lingered, not out of obligation but out of something real. And most of all, he remembered that moment the next morning when she had still been asleep beside him, peaceful, delicate, as if she had always belonged there. Lucian shook his head as if trying to clear the thought from his mind. It had been one night, a transaction. That was all. So why couldn't he forget her? Lucian did everything in his power to drown himself in work, using it as a weapon against the emotions he refused to acknowledge. He took on new projects, filled every spare moment with meetings, business trips, and relentless negotiations. He pushed himself harder than ever, hoping exhaustion would leave no room for thoughts of her. He even tried to return to the meaningless relationships of his past, the type of women who understood the rules, who sought his wealth but never his heart. But no matter how many distractions he chased, no matter how many walls he built, he couldn't escape the truth. Eleanor Hayes had changed something in him, and no amount of power could undo it. No matter how hard he tried, nothing worked. Lucian had always been a man who knew how to move on. Women came and went, never expecting more than what he was willing to give. They were drawn to his wealth, his power, the prestige of being associated with him, but none of them ever truly saw him, and that had never bothered him. Until now. Because every time he looked at another woman, he saw her. Eleanor. He saw the way she had looked at him, not with admiration for his power, not with hunger for his wealth, but with an understanding that had stripped him bare. No matter how much he tried to drown her out, to erase her from his mind, every effort was useless. Eleanor hadn't just left an impression. She had carved herself into him, into a place no one had ever touched before. But she was gone, and perhaps he would never find her again. Lucian Wolfe was not a man who accepted powerlessness. His entire life had been built on control. Over his empire, over his emotions, over every decision he made. He never allowed himself to be at the mercy of anything or anyone. Yet now, for the first time, he felt utterly powerless. Eleanor had vanished, and Lucian did what he always did when he wanted something. He ordered his people to find her. His investigators combed through every possible trace she might have left behind. Bank transactions, hospital records, hotel bookings, anything. But there was nothing. No unusual financial activity, no fixed address, no traceable phone usage. It was as if she had disappeared completely. The first report arrived, and when it told him nothing, his patience snapped. The whiskey glass in his hand shattered against the marble floor. Impossible, he snarled, his voice dangerously low. She can't just disappear. But she had, and it drove him insane. Lucian couldn't understand why he was this angry. He had wanted her to leave. He had set the terms. He had given her the check and convinced himself that this was exactly how it was supposed to end. He should have moved on. Gone back to his life. Unburdened, detached, untouched. But instead his heart betrayed him. He wanted to see her. He wanted to know where she was. He wanted to hear her voice, to look into her eyes again. More than anything, he wanted her back. And the more he searched, the more he failed to find her. The more it felt like he was spiraling into something he couldn't control. Days passed. Lucian became unrecognizable. His employees tiptoed around him, wary of his unpredictable moods. A single mistake in the office was enough to set him off. His patience, once razor-sharp, had become razor-thin. He worked harder, pushed himself beyond his limits, drowning himself in contracts, acquisitions, anything that could distract him. But no matter how much he tried to bury her beneath the weight of his work, the moment night fell, she was there. Her soft laughter echoed in his mind. Her touch lingered on his skin, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, walking away, carrying a piece of him that she didn't even know she had taken. Time passed, and Lucian Wolf was forced to accept a bitter truth. Eleanor was gone. He couldn't find her. No one could. And that only meant one thing. She didn't want to be found. The realization cut deeper than he expected. But Lucian Wolf was not a man who chased what had already left. If she had chosen to disappear, then he wouldn't search for her anymore. Even if his heart screamed at him to keep looking. Even if every morning he woke up hoping, just for a second, that she would still be there. Every morning, Lucian woke up hoping for a message, a phone call, anything. Every night, he caught himself listening for footsteps that would never come. But he forced himself to forget, because he had no other choice. After her mother's surgery, Eleanor left the bustling city behind. She settled in a small coastal town, a place untouched by the ghosts of her past. More importantly, it was a place where she could fulfill the terms of that fateful night's agreement. With the money she had received, she covered every last one of her mother's medical expenses. And then, she did something she had never dared to before. She opened a bakery. It was a simple shop, nestled on the town's main street, with a hand-painted wooden sign swinging gently above the entrance. Every morning, the scent of freshly baked pastries filled the air, wrapping the street in warmth and inviting strangers inside. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt something close to peace. Her mother had recovered. Though she still needed rest, she was well enough to sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching Eleanor move around the bakery with quiet contentment. And so, Eleanor allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, things would finally be okay. But fate had other plans. 2 months passed. Exhaustion crept up on Eleanor, but she brushed it off. It had been a long year. The weight of running a new business, the stress she had carried for months, it made sense that she was tired. Then came the nausea, the dizziness, and the realization that she had missed her cycle, twice. A strange fear gripped her chest. Her hands trembled as she purchased a pregnancy test from the pharmacy. Her heart pounded as she returned home, locking herself inside the quiet of her small bedroom. And then she saw it. 2 bright red lines. Pregnant. The air seemed to vanish from the room. The world blurred. Her fingers went numb, and for a moment she nearly dropped the test. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't know how long she sat there, frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. A storm of emotions swirled inside her, fear, uncertainty. But beneath all of it, there was warmth. Inside her, a tiny life was forming. A part of her. And a part of him. Lucian Wolf. His name echoed in her mind, forcing her to close her eyes and take a slow, shaky breath. She had never expected their fates to remain entwined in this way. And yet, despite the overwhelming shock, she did not regret it. Because this child, this life, was the result of a night she could never forget. It hadn't been a love story. It hadn't been a fairy tale. But that night, that single fleeting moment, had been the most real thing she had ever experienced. And now she carried a piece of him with her, forever. But just as a fragile sense of happiness bloomed within her, a terrifying thought shattered it. He would never accept this. Lucian Wolfe was not a man who believed in love, nor was he someone who allowed emotional attachments to tie him down. If he found out about the baby, would he take the child from her? He was a billionaire, a man with unlimited power, and she was just a woman who had once been nothing more than a transaction. Lucian Wolfe was a man with limitless power. If he wanted something, he got it. If he chose to bend the law bent for him. If he decided to claim the child, there was nothing Eleanor could do to stop him. But she knew exactly how it would be. The child wouldn't be a son or daughter to him. It would be a responsibility, a name on a contract, a possession, nothing more. And Eleanor could not allow that to happen. She would not let her child grow up in a world where love was secondary to power, where a father viewed his own flesh and blood as nothing more than an obligation. Her hand instinctively rested on her stomach over the tiny life growing within her. She would raise this child alone. She would give it the love and warmth her own mother had given her, making sure it never felt unwanted, never knew the cold, unfeeling world Lucian thrived in. She did not need him. She did not need a man who had already proven that his heart was impenetrable. It would be just her and her baby, a new life, a life free from anything or anyone who could take that happiness away. And so, Eleanor made her decision. Lucian Wolfe could never know. The endless blue sea stretched to the horizon, sunlight dancing over the waves as they kissed the shore. Along the coast, the seaside town was alive with energy. Tourists strolling along the boardwalk, cafes filled with laughter, the sounds of children's playful squeals echoing in the warm summer air. Lucian Wolfe had no patience for any of it. He walked along the wooden pier, his mind preoccupied, his thoughts elsewhere. Another business deal had just been finalized, flawlessly, as always. His sharp mind and ruthless precision had once again left no room for failure. And yet, despite another professional victory, he felt nothing. For years he had buried himself in work, using it as a shield against emotions he refused to acknowledge. But no matter how much he tried to move forward, one image refused to leave him. Eleanor, the woman who had vanished from his life without a trace. He had searched, desperately, relentlessly. Every resource at his disposal had led to a dead end. Eventually, he had been forced to stop looking, to accept the impossible. She was gone. And yet, despite the time that had passed, he had never truly forgotten her. And now, just when he least expected it, fate was about to change everything. Lucian strode down a narrow street near the beach, lost in thought, when, thud, a small body collided into him, followed by the unmistakable sensation of something cold spilling down the front of his expensive shirt. He halted, frowning as he looked down. A child, no older than 5 or 6, stood before him, clutching an empty juice cup in his tiny hands. The boy's wide eyes darted between Lucian's now stained black shirt and the growing puddle of liquid on the pavement. For a second, he seemed to freeze. Then, with an adorably serious expression, he looked up and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, mister." His voice was clear and polite, tinged with slight worry. Lucian narrowed his eyes, and in that moment, something in his world shifted. Lucian was about to issue a curt reprimand when his gaze locked onto the boy's face, and his world stopped. A jolt of recognition slammed into him like a physical blow. The boy had piercing blue eyes, not just any shade of blue, his blue, cold, sharp, the same gaze he saw in the mirror every morning. Dark brown hair, high cheekbones, a strong brow. The way the child scrunched his nose in concentration, the serious set of his little jaw, it was like looking at a smaller version of himself. A storm erupted in Lucian's chest. His heartbeat pounded in a way it never had before. His breath caught. His entire body went rigid. A terrifying, impossible realization struck him. But the boy, completely oblivious to Lucian's inner turmoil, was now dabbing a napkin against his soaked shirt, muttering to himself. "Mom says when you make a mistake, you should say sorry and fix it. But your shirt is black, so I guess it's not too bad, right?" Lucian flinched. "Mom." His mind latched onto the word like a lifeline. His jaw clenched, his fists curled instinctively. His voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with emotions he couldn't yet name. "What's your name?" The boy glanced up at him, tilting his head in a way that seemed far too mature for his small frame. For a brief moment, his big blue eyes studied Lucian, calculating, assessing. Then, with a mischievous glint, he grinned. "Mom says I shouldn't talk to strangers." Lucian was momentarily thrown off by the defiant response, but before he could react, the boy beamed and added, "But you don't look like a bad guy." Lucian's jaw tightened. He was losing control of the conversation, something that never happened to him. "Where's your mother?" His voice was quieter this time, but no less urgent. The boy hesitated, tilting his head thoughtfully before flashing another playful grin. "Not telling." And with that, he turned and bolted. Lucian stood frozen, watching as the boy weaved effortlessly through the crowd, his small frame disappearing between rows of seaside houses. His legs refused to move. His breath came shallow and uneven. The roar of the waves and the voices around him faded into nothingness. All he could see was that face, those eyes, and one single all-consuming thought: is that my son? Lucian Wolf was not a man who let things go easily, especially not when a child with his eyes had appeared before him. That night, he didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy's dark brown hair, the sharp blue gaze that mirrored his own, the innocent yet strangely observant expression that had unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Who was that boy? Was he Lucian's son? Lucian didn't believe in coincidences. His instincts, honed by years of navigating ruthless business negotiations, told him one undeniable truth: someone was keeping a secret from him. And if there was one thing he despised more than anything else, it was being lied to. By morning, his mind was set. His investigative team was already in motion. He would find out everything, no matter what it took. Because if that boy was his, then Eleanor Hayes had made the biggest mistake of her life. Within hours, a file landed on Lucian's desk. He scanned the document with sharp precision, his eyes devouring every word, until he saw her name: Eleanor Hayes. For a moment, the air seemed to vanish from the room. His grip tightened around the papers, his pulse hammering in his ears. The woman who had disappeared without a trace. The woman he had spent years trying to forget, but never could. She had been here all this time, living in a quiet seaside town, running a small bakery, and more than anything, she had given birth to a child. His child. A powerful surge of emotion crashed into him: anger, betrayal, disbelief, and something else. Something deeper. Something he refused to name. She had left him. She had vanished, taking their child with her. She had kept this secret from him for years. Did she really believe he would never find out? His jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. That was a mistake. Without hesitation, he stood abruptly, grabbed his coat, and strode toward the door. His voice was sharp, commanding. "Prepare the car." His assistant barely had time to react before Lucian was already walking out. "We're going to see Eleanor Hayes." The sleek black car rolled to a stop in front of a small, unassuming bakery nestled in the heart of the peaceful town. Lucian stepped out, his gaze locking onto the wooden sign above the door. Eleanor's little bakery. His breath came heavier. She was really here. For 5 years, she had been living a life without him, without a single word, without a single trace. She had built something, a world where he did not exist. A storm of emotions raged inside him, but he shoved them aside. Not yet. Drawing a deep breath, he stepped inside. A soft bell chimed at his arrival. Behind the counter, Eleanor stood carefully arranging pastries on a tray. She wore a simple beige dress, her long hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, a dark green apron tied around her waist. Strands of hair had fallen over her forehead, and flour dusted the tips of her fingers. She looked peaceful, as if she hadn't once walked away from him, as if she hadn't hidden his child from him. Then she turned, and everything stopped. Their eyes met, and her welcoming smile vanished. Her breath hitched, her fingers tightened around the cloth she had been holding. Lucian Wolf. The name echoed in her mind like a warning, like a past she had fought so hard to bury. And yet, there he was, standing in her bakery, looking at her like a storm barely contained. He hadn't changed. The same powerful, commanding presence, the same chiseled features, the same piercing blue eyes. But something was different. The anger was expected. The sharp edge in his voice was expected. But what she hadn't expected was the hurt lurking beneath his fury. Eleanor barely had time to react before Lucian took a step closer. His voice was low, cutting through the space between them like a blade. "Is there something you'd like to tell me, Eleanor?" She froze, her stomach twisted painfully. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She already knew. Lucian knew. Eleanor struggled to keep her breathing steady, but her hands trembled. She bit her lip, searching for the right words. Any words. But nothing came. Because for the first time in 5 years she had nowhere left to run. Eleanor's throat had gone dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Lucian let out a cold, humorless laugh. Really? His voice was dangerously low. Then let me spell it out for you. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them, forcing her to tilt her head up to meet his gaze. Yesterday, a boy ran into me. Eleanor's pulse quickened. He spilled juice on my shirt, Lucian continued, his voice steady, unrelenting. And when I looked into his eyes, he paused, his blue gaze locking onto hers, cutting through every layer of defense she tried to put up. I saw myself. A sharp breath caught in Eleanor's throat. Her worst fear had just become reality. He had seen their son. She had to stay strong. She could not let him take control. Lucian, this has nothing to do with you. She forced her voice to be steady, to sound unaffected. My life, my decisions, they don't concern you anymore. But Lucian didn't back down. He stepped even closer, his presence suffocating, his breath warm against her skin. Nothing to do with me? His voice was a low, dangerous growl. Eleanor, that boy is my son. The word sent a jolt through her, but she didn't let it show. Her fingers curled into fists. She couldn't deny it. But she couldn't admit it either. Because she knew Lucian Wolf. He was powerful, controlling, and if he truly knew, if he accepted the truth, he would never let her raise their child alone. He would take him. Eleanor's eyes burned, but she refused to show weakness. I don't owe you an explanation. She lifted her chin, her defiance unwavering, meeting his furious gaze head-on. Lucian's jaw tensed, his eyes darkened, the storm within them growing wilder. Then his voice dropped into a quiet, lethal whisper. Then I'll find the answers myself. And before she could react, he turned and strode out the door. Eleanor stood frozen, her heart pounding in terror. She knew he wasn't going to stop. He had found her once, and this time, Lucian Wolf would not let her disappear again. Lucian Wolf had never been a patient man. His entire life had been built on control, on making decisions that shaped the world exactly the way he wanted. But now, standing face to face with Eleanor, the woman who had taken his child from him for 5 years, he felt something he had never experienced before. Complete loss of control. She had walked away, without a word, leaving behind an emptiness inside him he hadn't even realized was there. And now, his son, his own flesh and blood, had grown up without him. Lucian took a slow, measured breath, forcing himself to stay calm, though the storm inside him threatened to break loose. His icy blue eyes locked onto Eleanor's, the intensity between them making the air feel heavy. His voice, low but commanding, cut through the tension like a blade. You and our son are coming back to the city with me. Eleanor's grip on the towel in her hands tightened, but she didn't back down. No. Lucian's jaw clenched, his expression darkening, his voice turned sharper, colder. Do you really think you can stop me? But she didn't flinch. 5 years had turned her into a different woman, stronger, fiercer, a woman who had learned how to fight for her child. Lucian, I don't belong in your world. Her voice didn't waver. Neither does our son. Lucian's breath hitched. I won't let him grow up in a place where love is a luxury. Her words hit him like a dagger straight to the chest. Did she really believe that? Did she really think he was incapable of love? Lucian had spent his entire life being perceived as ruthless, heartless, a man who saw emotions as nothing more than weakness. But for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was true anymore. Lucian Wolf had been called many things. Ruthless, cold, unforgiving. He had accepted all of it. But hearing this, hearing her say it, felt like a wound that refused to close. Because this wasn't just anyone. This was the only woman who had ever truly mattered. And her words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Lucian stepped closer, his voice low, taut with restrained anger. And something else. Something raw. Eleanor, my son has a right to know his father. His blue eyes burned into hers, his words firm, unyielding. And I will not stand on the sidelines. A pause. A heartbeat between them. Hate me if you want, but don't take him away from me. Eleanor bit her lip, struggling for a response. Because as much as she wanted to fight him, as much as she wanted to protect her son from the storm that was Lucian Wolf, she knew he was right. Theo deserved a father. But what if Lucien wasn't the kind of father Theo needed? What if he was only here for now? What if he left? She couldn't let Theo get attached to someone who might walk away. Do you really think you can just show up and change everything? Her voice shook slightly, thick with emotion. You don't know him, Lucien. You don't know how he's grown, what he's been through. You think he'll just accept you like that? Lucien stilled. She was right. He had never been a father. He had no idea what it meant to be one. But when he had seen Theo, when he had looked into those same piercing blue eyes, he had known with absolute certainty that he couldn't let him go. For the first time in his life, Lucien Wolf wasn't fighting for power. He wasn't fighting for control. He was fighting for his son. The start of something new. Lucien didn't force Eleanor to leave with him. He didn't make demands. Instead, he took a different approach. He started getting to know his son. At first, Theo regarded him with cautious curiosity. He didn't know who this man was, but there was something about him, something familiar. The way he spoke, the way he carried himself, the way he looked at him. One afternoon, as Lucien sat outside the bakery, Theo approached him with the wide-eyed innocence only a child could have. Are you one of Mommy's friends? Lucien's throat tightened. Friends. He had never been anyone's friend before. Still, he managed a small smirk. Maybe, but I'd like to be yours. Theo tilted his head, considering this. Then, with the seriousness of someone making the most important decision of their life, he asked, Do you like cookies? Lucien blinked. Cookies? Theo nodded eagerly. Mom makes the best ones. I can share some with you if you like. And then, something unexpected happened. Lucien chuckled. A genuine, unfamiliar sound that had been missing from his life for far too long. Theo was so much like Eleanor, warm, thoughtful, and far too kind for his own good. A father in the making. Day by day, Lucien became a presence in Theo's life. He listened as the boy chattered about school, about his friends, about the stories he made up in his head. And with each passing moment, Lucien saw how special his son was. Theo wasn't just smart, he was full of life, full of love. He adored his mother, smiled at the smallest joys, carried a heart far too big for a child his age. One afternoon, as Lucien sat on a bench in front of the bakery, Theo climbed up beside him, holding out a cookie. Mr. Alex, the boy said, using the name Lucien had given him. Do you want to be my best friend? Lucien froze. Best friend. No one had ever asked him that before. No one had ever wanted him to be anything more than a businessman, a billionaire, a dealmaker. And yet, here was this child, his child, offering him something far greater than anything money could buy. Lucien looked down at Theo, his chest tightening with something he didn't yet know how to name. He didn't just want to be Theo's friend. He wanted to be his father, winning back the woman who once walked away. Lucien had earned billion-dollar deals, had built an empire from nothing, had conquered every battlefield he had ever stepped onto. But this was the hardest fight of his life. Because winning back his son was one thing. Winning back the woman who had once walked away? That would take something far greater, something he wasn't sure he still had. But for the first time, he was willing to try. Lucien Wolf had never fought for anything outside of business. He had never needed to. But Eleanor Hayes was different. She didn't care about his wealth. She wasn't impressed by his power. The only way he could win her back was through something real. So for the first time in his life, he changed. He was no longer the cold, ruthless man who dictated people's lives. He showed up every day, not to demand, but simply to be present. He sat at the counter drinking the coffee she made. He watched her move, memorizing the small details, the way she bit her lip when she concentrated, the way her eyes softened when she looked at their son. And when she was too busy, he stepped in. He wiped down tables, moved chairs, did things he had never done in his life. He took care of her mother, ensuring she had her medication, checking on her health, even though the older woman still regarded him with suspicion. But he never wavered. He was patient, and slowly, Eleanor saw the change. She saw it when Theo got sick, and Lucien was the first to rush him to the hospital in the middle of the night. She saw it when she overworked herself, and he silently placed a cup of ginger tea on the counter. No words, just quiet understanding. She saw it when a storm hit the town, and he showed up at her door with blankets and food, making sure they were safe. Lucien wasn't forcing his way in. He wasn't buying his place in their lives. He was earning it. And no matter how hard she tried to keep her heart locked away, she was falling for him all over again. Eleanor had once feared that Lucien would take her child away. She had once believed he was incapable of love. But the man standing before her now was different. And for the first time in 5 years, she began to wonder, could she give him a chance? Eleanor had once believed she could never trust Lucien again. But he didn't try to win her back with money or power. He used his heart. He showed her through actions, not words. He learned how to bake from her, even though his clumsy hands left flour all over his expensive dress shirts. He picked Theo up from school, played ball with him, tucked him in at night with bedtime stories. Lucien Wolf was no longer the cold, ruthless billionaire. He was a father, a man who had learned how to love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Eleanor stood on the shore and watched, Lucien carrying Theo on his shoulders. Laughter rang through the air as their son gripped his father's hands, his giggles blending with the rhythmic crashing of the waves. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt no fear. She had loved Lucien once. She had never stopped. And now, as she watched him with their son, she knew it was time to stop running away. It was time to walk toward him. That evening, a message arrived. A simple request from Lucien. Meet me at the beach at sunset. When she arrived, her breath caught. The shoreline was illuminated by twinkling lights. A delicate path of rose petals led toward a small table set for two. And standing there, waiting for her, was the man she had once left behind. And the man who had, against all odds, fought his way back to her. Near the water's edge, beneath the golden hues of the setting sun, a small velvet box rested at the center of a delicate circle of rose petals. Eleanor's breath hitched. Before she even saw him, she felt it, the overwhelming tide of emotions swelling in her chest. And then there he was. Lucien stood a few feet away, dressed in an elegant white suit, his piercing blue eyes filled with something she had once thought impossible. Love. As she approached, he took a deep breath. And then, in one graceful motion, he dropped to one knee. His voice, deep and steady, carried over the soft ocean breeze. Eleanor, you are the only woman who has ever taught me what love truly means. I once believed I was incapable of loving anyone. But you and our son changed me. I don't want to live another day without you by my side. He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring that caught the last light of the sun. Marry me, so we never have to be apart again. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, not from pain, but from pure, unfiltered happiness. She looked at the man before her, the man who had once broken her heart, the man who had also become the only one who could mend it. And this time, she wasn't afraid. This time she knew he truly loved her. With a trembling smile, she whispered, "Yes." And the moment the words left her lips, Lucien surged forward, pulling her into his arms. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of redemption, of forgiveness, of forever. They married in an intimate ceremony by the shore, surrounded only by those who truly mattered. Eleanor walked barefoot across the warm sand, dressed in a simple yet breathtaking white gown, her hand entwined with Lucien's. Ahead of them, Theo ran, laughing, carefree, whole. Under the vast blue sky with the waves whispering their blessing, they exchanged vows. No more distance, no more misunderstandings, only love. From this day forward, we will never be apart again. A family finally whole. After the wedding, they returned to the city, but not as two separate souls, as a family. The once cold penthouse now overflowed with warmth, with laughter, with life. Eleanor no longer felt out of place, because she belonged here. Lucien no longer felt alone, because he had found the love he never knew he needed. And Theo had what every child deserves, a mother and a father. One quiet afternoon, they returned to the beach where it had all begun. Lucien wrapped Eleanor in his arms while Theo sat at their feet, building sandcastles with the pure joy only a child could know. Eleanor rested her head against Lucien's shoulder, breathing in the scent of salt, of warmth, of home. Lucien intertwined their fingers, his voice a soft murmur against her hair. "Thank you for coming back to me." Eleanor smiled, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for never giving up." The ocean stretched endlessly before them, no longer carrying the weight of past pain, but the peace of the present. and the promise of the future. They had lost each other once, but love had brought them back together. And this time, they would never let go. This story is a testament to the power of love, to its ability to heal, to change, to endure. Eleanor had the courage to face her past and embrace a love greater than her fears. Lucian, once a man of ice, had learned that the greatest wealth in life was not power, but love. Together, they built something that neither money nor status could ever buy. A family. Because in the end, happiness isn't about riches. It's about love, about patience, about the willingness to open your heart. One more time. Thank you for following this story. Let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and powerful stories. Leave a comment, share this journey with others, and stay tuned for the next one. Until next time, always remember, love wins.